Welcome back to Good Reads. I'm your host, Jim Hall, and we've got a wonderful show here today. One of Southfield's own has decided to join us, a wonderful author, Kathe Koja, just an amazing, amazing author, playwright, producer, and she lives in Southfield, and we're just so happy to have you today. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, I am thrilled, and let me say at the outset, my husband is an artist and illustrator and painter, and he and I recently moved to Southfield. We looked all around. It was time to leave our old empty nest, and we looked all around, and Southfield was at the top of our list because you literally you can go anywhere from here, you can have anything here, and you can live under big giant trees here. So we are just so pleased to be here.
We love the praise. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Well, I'm really excited to have you here, and you have written in a bunch of genres that are my favorite: horror, fantasy, science fiction, but you've also written historical fiction. You write all kinds of stuff and had an incredible career. You've also written young adult books, which is a really interesting topic to me, because when I was younger, a lot of stuff that, young adult, you can't read it. You can read, I can read young adult today. I still read young adult because 100%. I think it's just a little, in my humble opinion, a little less maybe foul language, but the important topics are still covered in young adult. But let's jump into your career, and you're award-winning. You've won Bram Stoker for The Cipher. You also won the Locus for that. A Locus Award also
for
that.
A recent story collection of mine, Velocities, won the Shirley Jackson Award, which I was particularly proud of, because Shirley Jackson, the story everyone knows of hers is The Lottery, but she had also a very wide and diverse career. She wrote short fiction that was in the New Yorker. She wrote novels that now would be considered weird or horror novels. She also had a completely different sidebar, extremely successful career writing what in those days was called women's fiction for magazines like McCall's, and these kind of sort of warm family-oriented stories, but they always had a little twist and a little turn in them. And yeah, there was nothing that she wouldn't attempt. So, and she wrote nonfiction. She wrote a book about, in fact, a YA book about the Salem witch trials for young people. And so there is nothing that she wouldn't try, and being able to have that award for one of my books was a big pleasure for me, big pride.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been aware of you because of short fiction that you've written many uncollected over the years in every type of best of collection, magazines that so people who are voracious readers are going to know you because you've been in so many collections. So you have a couple of short story collections out, but many of your works haven't been collected, so I want to talk about that, so hopefully that's something down the line. But where do you want to start? If you're talking about your career and should we start with this? Where would you like to go and steer this? What would you like to talk about?
I think what seems most interesting to me now, many years down the road as a writer, the way that my work has carried me has been in completely different directions than I ever expected that it would go, or ever planned for it to go. And I am not the same way that I don't rigorously plot out all my books. I have a general idea of where I'm going. It's the difference between saying, okay, I've got everything is mapped out, I've got the directions, I know exactly what my ETA is, or saying, let's just get in the car and go. I have a general direction, I know where I'm going, but that allows for detours and side trips, and sometimes you get to the same destination but in a completely different way. And that to me is what has been most interesting in the work that I've done. You mentioned my young adult novels. I have won awards for them as well. Had a wide and really rewarding readership, and have done lots of school visits. And young readers in a lot of ways are the least forgiving. If you are boring, they will tell you, but they are also so passionately engaged. I had done a school visit for one of my YA books called Stray Dog, and it is about, not surprisingly, a stray dog. A young woman tries to rehab a feral dog, and we follow her progress in this endeavor. And some of the kids just took the discussion in a completely different direction. And they ended up saying, should books be about the way we want the world to be, so we show an example of how things could be? Or should they be about the world as it is, so if we don't like something, we can change it? And this was a group of 6th graders in a bleacher in, I don't even remember where I was at this point, but filling up a bleacher in the middle of their school day, having this really passionate discussion about really what's literature for? What is it for? And those kinds of encounters and endeavors they're the best. They're the best.
That's spectacular, because you do get some amazing insights from young people that, and especially if they're reading early, sometimes it's just amazing what they'll come up when we do things at the library, different schools. It's amazing some of the questions with interactions. You talk about doing the young adult. You certainly can't be pigeonholed into any genre. As I said, I am an avid fan of horror, fantasy, science fiction, and you've done a lot of work there. You've also done a lot of work in a wonderful series, historical fiction.
Right, the Under the Puppy series.
And so tell me about that and what steers you into these. So you're award-winning for this, and you do that for 4 or 5 years. Darker horror, fantasy type stuff. And then you kind of took a sabbatical, and then you went in another direction. What steers that? What steers that creativity? And is there, you say there's not necessarily an overall plan, but what's kind of making these decisions to take you in these different areas of writing?
I just really follow my nose, to be honest. After my 4 or 5 original horror novels, I had a collection out called Extremities, and after that I changed literary agents, and my new agent, who has been my agent still, we have been friends and colleagues for a long time. And Christopher is the one who suggested that I might try YA, because it's a field and a literature that he knows extremely well and is very passionate about. And I had written a short story, in fact, called Stray Dog, that was sold to Cicada magazine, which was the YA equivalent of Cricket. Unfortunately, it's not being published anymore. It was a super magazine. And he said, you could really expand that story if you wanted to. There's a lot there. Do you want to think about doing that? And I thought about it and said, all right, I'll try. And because I've always felt, it kind of drives me crazy when people who don't read YA assume that it's somehow easier or less demanding kind of writing for kids, right? Like it's not as good, or not as you don't put as much effort, you don't put as much thought, or you don't have to, right? Because it's just for kids, which is just, it's maddening, number one, and it's disgusting to think that anyone would, why would you offer anything but your best to kids of all people? I mean, of anybody, kids should be getting your best work. And what I took very seriously in all the novels, all the YA novels that I wrote, and they were all with one publisher, Farrar, Straus and Giroux. My editor there I was really fortunate to wind up with Frances Foster was my editor, and among the YA and children's literature world, she was a legend. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but she was wonderful to work with, because it was really old school publishing in that we weren't worried about anything but how good can we make this book. And even when she and I would tussle, it was always with the same idea in mind. How can we make this the best book possible? And what that experience taught me, what writing for young people taught me, I would not have dreamed of bringing less than absolute honesty to writing for kids, right? Like it's a pejorative, writing for kids. Writing for kids is the most demanding kind of writing you can do, because too, adults will forgive some flab in books. Adults will forgive things that kids never will. If you're boring them, they don't. But they also have, and I saw this again and again and again in school visits, they also have a real reverence for books. Some of the events that I would do with some of my books for slightly older readers, high school age readers, I would take the book and I would go, fling, and I would throw it on the floor. And it never failed to get, this gasp, like, what are you doing? Why are you throwing a book on the floor? But my point that I would always make is a book without a reader it might as well, it's nothing. It's nothing. So if you're not reading and engaging with a piece of literature, it doesn't really exist without you. And sometimes when I would also be called in to do like a district-wide visit, so you visit every school in the district, and they would sometimes ask me if I wanted to visit some of the classrooms where maybe reading was more difficult, or where the kids had, for whatever reason, behavioral situations, whatever. And I love those kids. They would always be super on point and super interested in what you had to say. And to those kids, I would, because sometimes they would come up afterwards and go, I don't really read. I don't really like reading. And I firmly believe that books are out there for everyone. Your book is out there, but maybe those kids have not met it yet, and that is totally fair. But I would also point out to them, look, everybody in this world who wants to tell you what to do, because as a young person, you are told what to do all the time. Everybody knows how to read, who wants to tell you what to do. If you're going to meet them where they are, if you're going to have any chance with these people, you have to be a reader. You have to know how to read. I said, I don't care if you ever read any of my books or any fiction, but you must be a good reader, because your world is going to demand that you be able to navigate words. And so read something.
I think it's so wonderful when authors that I like and respect also dabble in the quote-unquote YA, because we need to get the next generation reading. We need to make reading important. And so you folks, by writing the young adult, but I laugh at the young adult stuff, because if Ray Bradbury was right, Ray Bradbury is the one that really captured me, or Tolkien, or these different things. It's not, what you're writing isn't YA, they're good books. And they're good books that just,
And sometimes, right, it's just a convenience of marketing. Where do we put these books in the shelf? Where do we put these books if we're selling them? How do we explain to someone? Because even when you ask, oh, what are you reading? And someone, the first thing they tell you is like, oh, it's a mystery. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's contemporary fiction. Oh, it's a horror novel. We are a categorizing species, and that's normal. But yeah, you do run into those speed bumps when there are things that could cross lots of categories. Think of all the adults who read Tolkien growing up, and that is 100% could be considered a YA novel. Sure. And it's also a great novel, and there's no reason why those things don't coexist. There's really only two kinds of writing, okay? There's good writing and there's bad writing. Those are the only two kinds that there are. Everything else is just, what shelf do we put it on?
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit, and as we're getting to know you, I want people at home that are thinking, I like this lady, I like what she says, I want to go out and I want to grab some books. Let's kind of talk about these genres that you've been into. You've already talked about, now I know you through short stories. That's how I got to learn about it over the years. I was so pleasantly surprised. So we're doing like, I've read this, I've read this, I've read this, I've got this collection.
Right.
So you'd recommend Extremities is a collection of your short fiction that you'd recommend. Let's talk about the horror that I really love. Talk to the folks at home and give us a couple titles that you would recommend people track down. Go to their bookstore, go online, whatever, track down. And then let's go YA, and then the adults. I think I just started to read this, and this is really catching. This is really, it grabs you right from the get-go. So let's talk about some different things that letting people get to know who you are and how you would like them to maybe learn about you through your books, and where they might be able to discover you, some suggestions from the author, if you will.
I would suggest for short fiction, the last collection that I had out was called Velocities. That came out just before COVID, in fact, and because sadly we had some really cool launch events planned that, like everything else, on pretty small potatoes to what was going on. But it was sad to miss those launch events, because sometimes short fiction, which is kind of crazy, because especially for our maybe you don't have time every night to sit down and read 8 chapters of a book, but you always have time to read short fiction. So I recommend people read all kinds of short fiction because it's perfect.
When it's great, it grabs you. And the themes will stick with you for a long, long time.
And it can do things in some ways that novels cannot. It is one thing, and right, it's one thing and it does one thing really well if it's well written, and then it's over. And yeah, it can really stay with you. So I would say look for my short fiction collection, Velocities, that came out from Meerkat Press, 2019, 2020. Another book that is out, in fact, a series that is out from Meerkat Press is The Mighty Dark Factory and Dark Park. And I'm working on the 3rd book right now in that trilogy called Dark Matter. And this is about...
is there like a so I was looking at, there's like a cyberpunk feel to the newest one.
There is, and it really is about, in a lot of ways, how our technology is shaping us, and how do we define reality? How do we know anymore what's real or what is not real? And can we, because humans are great at making things and then figuring out afterwards that they can do a lot of things that we didn't expect, and the genie's out of the bottle, it's too late. So a lot of what this looks at is what are the impacts of technology on just us. The books are set in a dance club with customizable reality, so you can kind of have any sort of experience you want if you will pay for it. And there's a menu, you can scroll down and see what. And one of the fun things with this series is now I'm working with a Chicago-based collaborator, hi Charlie, on turning the Dark Factory narrative, also expanding it into VR. And because reality is reality. And if people go to the darkfactory.club site, there is free fiction on the site in the Dark Factory world. You get to know the characters. You can see some reviews of the books to see if you're interested. We tried to make the site as much like reading the book as we could. So that was, it's quite an undertaking, and it's still being undertaken. And I have to give a shout out to Tricia Reeks and Meerkat Press. They're based in Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the great things about working with independent presses is that they are game to try things. And because they're not a gigantic press with a million moving parts, they don't have to be as worried, and they don't have to play it as safe as a major publisher. And I have worked with giant publishers before, and they're good for other things too. But I love working with indies because there's nothing they won't try.
Now here's something, eye-catching covers. Yeah. And you can write the greatest book that's ever been written, but if it doesn't catch somebody's eye, is it going to be written? That word of mouth and all that kind of wonderful covers on these books. Absolutely love what they're doing to catch people's eyes.
It's true, and especially too because we're such a visual culture now. And a lot of times when you're looking at a book like this, you're not looking at it in a bookstore. You're going to be looking at it online and on your phone. And those little thumbnails, sometimes it can be the most beautiful eye-catching cover, but if you can't make it out in a little tiny picture, it's too easy to turn your attention elsewhere. And that really is the world that we live in. We can say, oh, it shouldn't be that way, but it is that way.
Right. It's unfortunate. Should a plain white or black cover should be able to, but that's not how it is. Right. And if you get some extra great art, and they've done a great job of doing that.
And you have Under the Poppy there too, which is another example of just a cover that just killed it. Yes. It is the book is about puppeteers in Victorian times, and yeah, they showed me 3 or 4 different covers, and when we got to that one, we all just gasped and said, "Okay, that's it. That's the one we need." So, yeah, they did, and that is a real. My husband, Rick Leader, as I said, is an artist as well and has done cover work and did some covers for my novels as well. He had already been working with FSG when I started to work with them, and so he did some of my covers too. And it's really a distillation of what the book is about in one image, which is a lot harder than it sounds. It's really hard. And there are some books with just terrible covers that you'll never pick them up, which is a shame.
Every author I've ever had on different interviews, we always discuss that, how important, even though it's all about, but a great cover can get more readers for you. And the more readers, then the more word of mouth and so on, and then it's a never, a very positive thing. I don't want to run out of time. There's so much to talk about with you as I've kind of did a deep dive.
Well, we will have to do this again.
And we 100% will. We've already talked in the summer. I'm going to have you back. But I'm so interested in the fact that you're also a playwright. You've produced some of your own fiction into plays, and you've done stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that and how writing as a play, how that differs in your mind for novels and short stories and stuff, and where you see yourself going with that?
Well, unfortunately, COVID put a stop to my live performance work, but what I had been doing before then and will do again in the future is immersive performance. And the idea is you are not sitting in a chair passively watching something happen on a stage. The story is happening all around you, and you are free to participate in it as you're invited to do so. You don't have to, but you're free to do it. So I had adapted my own Under the Poppy. I did events all over the city. One was at the DIA, one was at the Russell Industrial Center, one was the final one was at a Victorian mansion in Brush Park before it got completely brush parked and gentrified. But yeah, it was great to have people experiencing the story in 3D and happening all around them. And I did some other stories, novels that had meant a lot to me, like Wuthering Heights, which is probably my favorite book, and Dracula. We did a version of Dracula where the idea was you were coming to Dracula's table, and he was going to be interviewing Jonathan Harker, whether or not he's going to hire him as a lawyer, and you're there at the table. And as the scene changed, every time there were seats at the table, and we would invite people to be seated. And every time, like, the act changed, we would make people move one seat closer. And it was so fun. And what's really brilliant about this is the way that people react to the story when it's happening, right, like to them, really. It's happening to them, and they're part of that energy. Really wonderful, surprising things would happen at every performance that we never looked for. And I had worked with a really dedicated, wonderful group of performers and designers and musicians, and I worked with scent creator, fire artists, drone artists, all different people put together to make these events that were then, you invite people kind of to come in and play with you and have fun with you. So yeah, that sounds
amazing. I hope you start that back up again very soon.
I really would like to do that again, because it is a ton of work, you can imagine, and because you're not working like in a straight proscenium theater, you are finding the venues have to match with whatever story you're telling, and that can be a challenge. But when it works, I had done a production of Christopher Marlowe's Faustus in the First Unitarian Universalist Church on Cass Ave in Detroit. And being able to have people come into a church setting to experience the story about faith and losing your soul and what do you believe, and you could not have duplicated that energy in any theater. It was massive. And the church organist, the music minister, asked me, well, who is playing for your show? And I said, well, no one. We don't have music. He said, well, would you like music? I said, yeah. He said, how about if I play for you? And he brought a whole raft of musical ideas that were just brilliant, that I would never have thought of. I
added a whole nother level.
Oh, 100%, because when like when you walk into a church or a religious setting, a lot of times there's music playing, and so to be able to have that, it was giving people the kind of cues. This is sort of like something you know, but it is not like something you know. And the way people behaved in that setting too, that like they're different there than they were at the DIA, or that they were at the house, or that they were in the basement for Dracula. So the setting tells a lot of the story too, and that is very exciting. That's what we're hoping to do with Dark Factory VR, because that setting in virtual reality can be limitless. We can do anything we want there. So how are we going to construct that and have people come in and play, and then we're not limited geographically or by, a pandemic or by anything. Anybody can play. Anybody can be part of it.
Virtual reality is such a game changer. I had a deep conversation about not knowing that much about it, and then really had my eyes open to the possibilities and how it can be quite a tool for authors to utilize going forward, and filmmakers and just creative people.
Because anything literally can happen. Anything can happen, and people can safely experience things that they could not in real life, or things that don't exist in real life, but they can experience them. So yeah, it's an exciting thing to use, and I really believe that the technology to use it will get cheaper, because there is still a cost barrier for some of the VR rigs, and more ubiquitous. I mean, it took a while for us all to live on our phones. So this is going to take a minute too, but I really think it's a medium that is going to explode.
I agree with you 100%, because I think what you just said about the phones, how long did that take? 10 years, 15 years, where everybody now, 20 some where, we all had phones, but now everybody's, I think it'll be within 10 years that everybody's going to have their own, just like you have appointment TV watching used to be a thing.
Right.
Movies every week used to be a thing. I think that will become, that people will devote a portion of their daily time to this virtual reality
because
stuff.
it's just another way of telling a story. And narrative will never die. Narrative, we have always needed stories. Everyone is a natural storyteller. We experience life as a story. We tell each other stories. What'd you do today? That's a story. How was school? Fine. But that's a story too. That story is, I don't want to talk about school right now. But it's natural to us to tell and to want to be told stories. One of the things that I like to do when I do readings, and I wore my pale green pants in homage to this, there's a wonderful indie bookstore called Toadvine Books, and we have a reading series there. Oh, Toadvine, it's on Coolidge Ave in Berkeley. Everybody should go there. They have new books. They have wildly well curated.
What a bookstore should be.
It's everything that a bookstore should be, and they're right next door to a coffee place. I mean, you cannot go wrong. But Luke Janes, who owns the store, he and I cooked up this reading series called Pale Green Pants. It was the first reading was based on the Dr. Seuss book, the story of Pale Green Pants, which is the story's title is What Was I Scared Of? And I read that, and I read some other stuff. And then we do these theme events where people come to the store, and because it's a reading, they get stickers, they get snacks, we have a lot of fun. For Valentine's reading, some people came in costume. So we're looking to do another one of those later in the year, I'm sure. We'll have another one.
And if you do one of those, I'll definitely come out and we'll get some video of that and record that. Before we run out of time, I wanted to do two things. First, tell us about what's coming up here in 2024 as we're right at the start here in the spring, but I know you've got some books coming out in 24. You've got a book coming out, and with all these, you've got a lot of different balls in the air, a lot of irons in the fire. Tell us about what we should be looking for this year.
Later this year, I have a novel coming out called Kathe and the Ghost, and it's based on Wuthering Heights, which is my favorite book, and it's a retelling or a companion telling of the story in Catherine's voice, because in the original novel, she is dead, and we only get other people's experiences of her. But Katherine gets to tell her own story, and her daughter, who is also Katherine, tells her side of the story too. So that will be out in October from Clash Books, and we will be having some kind of an immersive event. We are planning it now. I'm not sure what we're going to do yet, but that is what's happening in 2024. The VR stuff, I hope, will be up and running in 2025. In spring of 2025, I have a reissue of a novel of mine called Skin coming out from Meerkat Press, and that will be out springish 2025, and then Dark Matter, the last in the Dark Factory books, will be out in 2026. And then I'm going to sit down for like 5 minutes.
Now, before we say goodbye, remind people about the Dark Factory website and then about your website, how people can learn more about you and possibly order books or support you, best ways to support you.
Yes. Go to darkfactory.club, C-L-U-B, and the whole Dark Factory world is there to be explored and enjoyed, and there's free fiction there that people can read if they want to have a little taste of what that world is like. You can find me on Instagram and on Facebook. I'm Kathe Koja in both places. And KatheKoja.com, where I put news and kind of longer term stuff that people can look back on. And you can get in touch with me in any of those places. I'm very easy to find.
Excellent. Kathe,
and I'm very nice and I don't bite or anything.
This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been wonderful speaking with you. This has been a fun interview, and as we spoke off camera, you can count on we're going to have you back here in June or July because you multiple visits, and we're still not going to be able to cover all there is to talk about with you. But we're going to plan on getting back together in June or July here in studio, and then when you have one of these events off campus, we're going to come to that also. And who knows, we're going to do our best to get you here at the Southfield Library also.
I would love that. I have been coming to the Southfield Library for years, and to be able to come here with a residence library card, I feel pretty good about that.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for being on the show today, Kathe. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim, for having me.
That wraps up this episode of Good Reads. We so appreciate you watching. Kathe mentioned a wonderful bookstore earlier, Toadvine Books. Whatever your favorite bookstore is, go there, support it, look up some of Kathe's books, look up your favorite author, but support local bookstores. And also don't forget about your library, because what you may not be able to find at the bookstore, we've always got here at the Southfield Library. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.